Ja, sehr schönen guten Nachmittag, liebe Seherinnen und Seher vom YouTube-Kanal von International. Hier spricht Fritz Edlinger. Wir haben heute wiederum etwas, was wir schon mehrfach gemacht haben. Ich mache nur einen relativ kurzen Vorspann zu einem extern erstellten Video, das wir weiterleiten wollen. Es geht in diesem Fall um ein Video eines Providers, einer palästinensischen Mediengruppe namens Palestine Chronicle, von einem gewissen Ramzy Baroud. Ramzy Baroud ist ein in einschlägigen internationalen Kreisen sehr bekannter palästinensischer Wissenschaftler und Journalist. Und er hat vor 2 Tagen gemeinsam mit einer Mitarbeiterin von ihm einen Bericht über die aktuelle Situation in Jerusalem gestaltet und ins Netz gestellt. Es gibt seit einigen Wochen, konkret kann man sagen eigentlich seit Beginn des Fastenmonats, des islamischen Fastenmonats Ramadan, in Ostjerusalem sehr, sehr heftige Unruhen. Man kann eigentlich sagen, es war ja in den Medien auch schon darüber berichtet, Straßenkämpfe. Und zwar werden diese ausgelöst in erster Linie von Mitgliedern einer Organisation mit dem Namen auf Hebräisch Lehava. Lehava bedeutet so viel wie Feuer, Flamme. Das ist eine ultraorthodoxe rechtsradikale Organisation, die sich beruft auf eine legendäre israelisch-jüdisch-zionistische Terrororganisation namens Kach. Der Gründer dieser Organisation war ein gewisser Meir Kahane, der dann verurteilt wurde als Terrorist und sehr, sehr übel beleumundet ist. Und diese Organisation, das war vor 30 Jahren etwa, diese Organisation Lehava sind überwiegend junge Leute, die sich auf den Meir Kahane berufen und die im Wesentlichen jegliches Zusammenleben, jegliche Integration mit Arabern, mit Moslems, aber auch mit Christen unter den Palästinensern, also mit allen anderen Religionen berufen, nach dem Motto, dass in Wirklichkeit nur das jüdische Volk das Auserwählte und daher allen anderen vorzuziehende ist. Diese Gruppe hat im Übrigen bei den letzten Knesset-Wahlen, bei den vor wenigen Wochen stattgefundenen israelischen Parlamentswahlen, einen überraschenden Wahlerfolg mit einer eigenen Liste, die sich nennt religiöse Zionisten, eingefahren. Und führende Vertreter dieser religiösen Zionisten haben ein sehr enges Verhältnis zu Benjamin Netanyahu, dem Ministerpräsidenten. Es hat da sogar auf der Liste für die Wahlen gewisse Absprachen gegeben. Und einer ihrer neuen Abgeordneten war sogar in den letzten beiden Regierungen von Netanyahu bereits Minister, nämlich ein gewisser Bezalel Smotrich, ein übler Rassist. Und der bekannte israelische Schriftsteller, Journalist liberaler Herkunft Gideon Levi, er schreibt seit vielen Jahren, Jahrzehnten bei der israelischen Tageszeitung Haaretz, der bezeichnet diese Lehava-Kämpfer als neofaschistische Schläger. Das ist also keine Wortschöpfung von Fritz Edlinger, sondern das ist eine Einschätzung jemandes, der dort lebt, der dort arbeitet und der diese Leute kennt. Das heißt, es gibt in Wirklichkeit ein enges Verhältnis zwischen der Likud-Partei, der Partei von Benjamin Netanyahu und diesen tatsächlich terroristischen, rechtsradikalen Rassisten. Das ist etwas, was mitunter im Westen, im Ausland, auch in Europa verborgen wird, aber es gibt hier eine Zusammenarbeit. Ganz konkret kann man das auch dingfest machen an einer Geschichte, das wird in dem Video dann auch noch näher beschrieben. Gerade jetzt läuft auch wiederum eine dieser berühmt-berüchtigten Evakuierungsaktionen der israelischen Behörden. Diesmal geht es um einige Dutzend palästinensischer Familien im bekannten palästinensischen Vorort von Ostjerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah. Ein mir sehr gut bekannter Ort, ein ganz netter, alter palästinensisch-arabischer Vorort, wo de facto nur Palästinenser, Araber leben. In letzter Zeit haben sich dort allerdings dann auch israelische rechtsradikale Siedler angesiedelt. Und es geht jetzt darum, wiederum in der üblichen Vorgangsweise mit irgendwelchen Tricks und mit irgendwelchen rechtlichen Winkelzügen hier einige Dutzend Familien in Wirklichkeit zu evakuieren, ihre Häuser zu zerstören oder gleich irgendwelchen Israelis zu schenken und sie außer Landes zu bringen. Und hier gibt es de facto eine Zusammenarbeit zwischen rechtsradikalen, neofaschistischen Schlägern, Gideon Levi auf der Straße, und den israelischen Regierungsbehörden, um diese Palästinenser zu vertreiben, um ihr Leben derartig mies zu machen, dass sie vielleicht freiwillig gehen oder dass sie, wenn nicht, dann halt vertrieben werden können. Das ist im Wesentlichen im Moment die Situation in Israel, in Jerusalem, wenige Wochen nach der Wahl und während des islamischen Fastenmonats Ramadan, wo üblicherweise gläubige Moslems einfach in die beten, hungern während dem Tag. Am Abend gibt es gemeinsames Zusammenkunft und Gebete, und das wird jetzt in völlig inakzeptabler Weise von rassistischen Israelis leider gestört. Und bei dieser Gelegenheit, das ist im Wesentlichen das Video. Ich möchte aber noch abschließend einen weiteren aktuellen Hinweis geben zum Thema, weil das gerade auch sich jetzt abspielt. Es hat vor 2 Tagen wiederum eine Veröffentlichung gegeben über die Menschenrechtssituation in Israel beziehungsweise in den besetzten palästinensischen Gebieten. Ein langer Bericht, 240 Seiten, der unter anderem zum Ergebnis kommt, das ist auch die Headline: In Israel und in den palästinensischen Gebieten herrscht ein System der Apartheid. Apartheid ist klar definiert durch eigene Gesetze, internationale Normen aufgrund der Erlebnisse und Ereignisse in Südafrika. Apartheid ist schlicht und einfach ein System, wo ein Volk, eine Ethnie, möglicherweise auch eine Religion, sich über eine zweite erhebt, sich besser als diese zweite eben dünkt und alles daran setzt in der Politik, diese zweite Gruppe zu benachteiligen, zu vertreiben, zu diskriminieren. Das ist Apartheid. Nur diese Diskussion gibt es schon seit Jahren de facto. Diesmal ist es etwas schmerzhaft für Israelis und die westlichen Freunde der Israelis. Der Autor dieser Studie, dieser aktuellen Studie, ist eine US-amerikanische Organisation namens Human Rights Watch, der man üblicherweise, sie ist eine sehr offizielle US-amerikanische Organisation, sie hat enge Beziehungen zur US-amerikanischen Regierung, sie wird auch zum Großteil von der US-amerikanischen Regierung finanziert. Und nun kann man der US-amerikanischen Politik keine israelfeindliche, vorurteilsbehaftete Einstellung vorwerfen, im Gegenteil. Und daher gibt es seit 2 Tagen eine massive, heftige Diskussion, wo man sagt, ja, und selbst Human Rights ist quasi dem hineingefallen, dass unsere einzige nahöstliche Demokratie als rassistisches Apartheidsregime diffamiert wird. Das ist jetzt der O-Ton der Israelis. Ich wollte darauf hinweisen, es wird auch im Video kurz angeschnitten, wir werden uns auch erlauben, in dem Newsletter, welches wir zur Veröffentlichung und Freischaltung dieses Videos verschicken werden, einige Quellen anzugeben für jene, die ganz genau nachrecherchieren wollen, auf welche Texte und auf welche Autoren wir uns beziehen und ich mich auch bezogen habe, wird es dazu die entsprechenden Links geben. In diesem Sinn, schauen Sie sich dieses nächste Video an. Es ist schrecklich genug. Ich glaube nur, es ist notwendig, sich diesen Realitäten zu stellen und es ist einfach wichtig, dass man dem entgegentritt, was von der israelischen und von der Propaganda der Israel-Lobby auch bei uns in Österreich, in Europa, in der ganzen Welt einfach falsch dargestellt wird. Hier geht es nicht um einen terroristischen Angriff von islamistischen Terroristen, sondern hier geht es um jüdische, rechtsradikale Rassisten, die im Wesentlichen sich selbst über alle anderen stellen wollen. In diesem Sinn schauen Sie sich das, wie gesagt, an. Ich darf auch noch einmal verweisen auf unsere jüngsten Videos. Wir haben gerade zu ähnlichen Themen in den letzten Wochen schon 2 andere Videos veröffentlicht. Wer sich das noch nicht angesehen hat, welcome. Das war ein Gespräch mit Abi Melzer über die Themen Antisemitismus, Israel-Kritik und es war ein Gespräch mit Professor Moshe Zuckermann unmittelbar zum Termin der israelischen Wahlen über die politische Situation in Israel vor und nach den Wahlen. Höchst interessant, höchst aktuell und für manche, die sich nicht gut auskennen im Nahen Osten, in Israel und in Palästina auch höchst schockierend. In diesem Sinn herzlichen Dank und wir freuen uns über jeden Kommentar, über jedes zusätzliche Abo. In dem Zusammenhang herzlichen Dank für die zahlreichen neuen Abo-Bestellungen der letzten Wochen. Auf Wiedersehen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this for this news update from the Palestine Chronicle. The idea here is to update you about what is happening in Palestine at the moment. I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with the situation there, realize that thousands of extremist Jewish Zionist settlers have been attacking Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, particularly the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, and have been assaulting Palestinians. Hundreds of Palestinians have been injured. Many have been suffocated by the Israeli tear gas that has been lobbed by the Israeli police in the city. And as a result, Palestinians throughout the occupied territories are standing in solidarity with their brethren in Jerusalem, in what is now being dubbed the Jerusalem Uprising. We need to talk about why is this happening right now. I know we're so familiar with how random the Zionist violence against Palestinians can be in Israel, to the point that quite often we neglect to actually look at the political aspect of it. So we're going to be looking at the political aspect. Why is Netanyahu unleashing the hordes against Palestinians in Jerusalem? What is he hoping to achieve after his failure to sabotage the nuclear talks in Vienna between Iran, the US, and others? So that's the political aspect. And we are going to run you through the timeline of this event, or these events that are happening in Palestine, just in case mainstream media tells you otherwise, because we're so familiar how mainstream media constantly spin the story in favor of Israel, so it may appear as if it was the Palestinians who actually instigated the violence. So we're going to try to educate ourselves, all of us, on what actually happens. We have a short timeline for you. Of course, we welcome your comments. We welcome your feedback. We are going to be live for about half an hour, and we are going to be looking at the live news as well and getting you the latest. So please stick with us and share this broadcast so that we can reach as many people as possible. Joining me from Rome, Italy is my co-host, Romana Rubio. Welcome to the show, Romana.
Thank you, Ramzy. How are you?
I am well. So tell us tell us a little bit about the succession of events, Romana,
Yes.
about the timeline of this.
The Jerusalem Uprising, this is how it was dubbed, actually started on the first day of the holy month of Ramadan, on April 12th, when Israel started with its provocations, cutting the electrical wires for the call for prayer in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. As we know, Jerusalem has been the theater of severe tensions over the last few months, and it's also the center of tensions because in view of ahead of Palestinian elections, Israel doesn't want to allow Palestinians to vote. So the tensions were already present in the town. On April 13, around 70,000 Palestinians decided to show up at the Damascus Gate, one of the gates that leads to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to pray. And of course, Israeli police tried to prevent them from praying during Ramadan. The tensions were really high on April 22nd, when the Israeli Lahava terror group, which is an extremist group which advocates for killing Palestinians in Jerusalem and all over Palestine, they marched through Jerusalem, and we are looking at the pictures now. And they were,
you know, I'm going to stop you here for a minute, Romana, just to introduce our readers who are not familiar with this group, Lahava. What is Lahava? Lahava is a Jewish far-right organization based in Israel that strictly opposes Jewish assimilation, objecting to most personal relationships between Jews and non-Jews. It is opposed to the Christian presence in Israel as well. So their war is not just on Palestinian Muslims, but Christians and Christians of all kinds, even non-Palestinian Christians as well. For a long time, Lahava's focus has been on the issue of marriages, denouncing marriages between Jews and non-Jews, as it is forbidden in their interpretation of Jewish law. Its action have been denounced even by the president of Israel, Rivlin himself, calling them rodents growing under the shared democratic and Jewish foundation of Israel, which we know it's a hoax anyway. But this is really interesting, this notion. I believe these are members of Lahava.
Yeah.
Now, why these rodents are being unleashed on Palestinians right now? And here is two ways of looking at this, Romana, before we carry on with the timeline. On one hand, the Palestinians have declared that they intend to hold elections in May. In May and July, respectively, and am I correct? May and July, and then the August elections for the Palestine National Council. But of course, fundamental for this, in order for this to work, Jerusalem has to vote. Of course, the Israeli government does not want Jerusalem to vote because they claim Jerusalem to be their undivided and eternal capital, and voting Palestinians there makes Palestinians in Jerusalem political agents and give them a claim to sovereignty in Jerusalem, which is something that Israel doesn't want. But there is another factor, and that is Netanyahu is an embattled politician in Israel, and he is afraid that he might not, and most likely will not, be able to form a government, a unity government, because he just does not have enough vote in the Knesset. As a result, or enough seats in the Knesset, as a result, to avoid a fifth elections in Israel within about 2 years, he has only one option and one option only, and that is to start what they call emergency government. But for an emergency government to happen, there has to be a crisis of some kind. And of course, what is the easiest crisis you can manufacture? Attacking Palestinians. Now, they tried to do it with Iran. Remember, they sabotaged nuclear facilities in Iran, and they were hoping that the Iranians are going to retaliate in such a way that Israel will find itself in crisis mode again, and a crisis government will happen, or an emergency government will happen. But that did not happen. So they turned to, in their perception, to be the weakest link, and those are the Palestinians. And of course, we are in the month of Ramadan. So Jerusalem, Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the holy shrines in Jerusalem, I mean, they are always very fundamental and central to the Palestinian narrative and the Palestinian struggle. But in Ramadan, they acquire added value and added meaning. So when the attacks happened, Romana, it wasn't just thousands of extremists. First of all, you can't just have thousands of people march into Jerusalem without a central plan. And when these Jewish extremists marched into Sheikh Jarrah in the middle of the night, why were they accompanied by hundreds of Israeli police? I mean, the whole thing was organized from the very beginning. It's not like the police woke up in the middle of the night and they realized that thousands of extremists are attacking Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah, chanting death to the Arabs, death to the Arabs. The whole thing was orchestrated, obviously, with the police, and that means that Netanyahu must have had a hand in all of this. And as a result, of course, Palestinians in Gaza, who are always standing in solidarity with their own brethren in the rest of Palestine, had to take a stance as well. So clashes ensued in Gaza, and now the situation is exploding for the 12th day straight. Netanyahu is now afraid of international reactions, the European Union, the United Nations. Even the US State Department has condemned hate speech in Jerusalem without naming names. They were obviously referring to the Jewish extremists. So Netanyahu is trying to play kind of like this middleman position, that he is calling on, as he is now calling on all parties to cease hostilities, as if the poor residents of Sheikh Jarrah had anything to do with the hostilities, or the Palestinian Muslim worshippers in Al-Quds, in Al-Aqsa, had anything to do with the hostilities, and they are not in a position of self-defense. Now, the question is, will Netanyahu be able to achieve his political end? Will he be able to reap the political benefit from all of this. I am bringing my co-host Romana to carry on with the updates. What is happening in Gaza, at the border particularly, Romana?
Yes, after, over 100 Palestinians were injured on April 22nd, the uprising, the protests spread throughout the West Bank and Gaza, particularly last night in the Kalandia checkpoint and in Gaza at the northern fence separating Gaza, besieged Gaza from Israel. Of course, the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli troops were stationed across the border, and they fired at the protesters, injuring 3 of them. Also, there were Israeli airstrikes on the street last night, and we know that many sites were destroyed. The Israeli army claimed that over 30 rockets were fired from Gaza to Israel, but there were no damages reported in Israel. While 3 people, we repeat that, were injured in Gaza by Israeli gunfire.
Tamar Fleischman, one of Palestine Chronicle's best contributors for many years, writing from Israel, Lahava, it's a Nazi group. And just to give you an idea about the nature of the events as depicted by Israeli media itself. Let me just read to you this short excerpt from Mondoes, reporting, conveying reports provided by Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. More pictures. Clearly, this is not, I mean, if you look at the behavior of the Israeli police, and by the way, I think this is police, this is not army, just kind of indicative of how the Israeli police treats Palestinians, this kind of army-like behavior. Absolutely, yeah. Against unarmed civilians who are in a position of self-defense. This is what Mondoes report. There are horrifying images, and if you could kindly just show some of these images as I am reading this, Romana. There are horrifying images from Jerusalem last night of a mob of racist Jews chanting that the city belongs to them and Arabs should burn. The young American Jewish group, If Not Now, guys, if you do not follow If Not Now, please do. They do fantastic work, and they are constantly being targeted by Israeli media, mainstream media, even in the US itself, and by the lobby groups here in the US because of their very strong pro-Palestinian stand. The young American Jewish group, If Not Now, labeled the mob a pogrom in another assertion of moral leadership over community elders who ignore the violence. So kudos to the young Jewish activist group, If Not Now. Quote, hundreds of Jewish supremacists march in Jerusalem tonight, chanting death to Arabs, reports Noah Landau of Haaretz. Some of the supremacists attacked Palestinian homes. Writers Bin Rif also calls it a pogrom. Tonight, hundreds of Israeli youths are marching through Arab areas of Jerusalem chanting death to Arabs. And, quote, the people demand Arabs on fire. And we have actually seen this in action with the burning of Palestinian homes and the killing of a Palestinian family at one point a few years ago. So this idea of Arabs on fire is not a hostile sentiment. It's something that at times can be turned into something real, and are now attacking the homes of Arabs in the Old City. Call it what it is, a pogrom. The mob was asserting Jewish claim to Jerusalem and was aimed at Palestinians who were emerging from the Old City at sundown in Ramadan. So this is how Mondoes describes the events, citing Israeli media. Some of our readers, some of our faithful readers of the Palestine Chronicle may remember our editorial from a few weeks ago. We were, again, really kind of at the forefront of warning that these things are about to happen, because thanks to our reporters in Palestine, who are trying to follow the scene and the developments as closely as possible. So we have an editorial, if Romana could kindly share it with our readers, called The Nakba of Sheikh Jarrah. The Nakba of Sheikh Jarrah, how Israel uses the law to ethnically cleanse East Jerusalem. So as we said, there are several events that have building up here. On one hand, there have been Israeli decisions by the Israeli courts to ethnically cleanse many families from the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. So tension is already there. Then the Israeli government decision not to allow Palestinians in East Jerusalem to exercise their democratic right and to vote. And number three, you also have the crisis in Israeli politics and Netanyahu's desperate attempt at creating some kind of distraction with the ultimate hope that this is going to unify the right-wing camp, which is the powerful ruling camp in Israel, to have them rally behind him at these times with the hope of establishing what they call emergency government. So this is the context. Just to get back to Gaza, regarding what is happening in Gaza at the moment, we heard from our photographer, photojournalist there, Mahmoud Adjour. Mahmoud is telling us that there has been close cooperation between Islamic nationalist and socialist movements in Gaza, who are standing in solidarity with our brethren in Al-Quds in East Jerusalem, who are now under a systematic and joint attack by the Israeli forces and by extremist Jewish settlers and extremist groups. The head of Al-Islamic Jihad, Khalid al-Batsh, or one of the leaders of Islamic Jihad, Khalid al-Batsh in Gaza, said, quote, "We will protect Al-Quds through our resistance and our weapons and our determination." Again, this is what really the Israelis or the Israeli government is hoping to do, is to create this kind of provocation that will leave Palestinians in Gaza no other option but to retaliate. And you know, if you are following the Palestine Chronicle news, again, folks, this is not something you are going to be getting from any mainstream news outlet whatsoever. Only Electronic Intifada, Mundoist, the Palestine Chronicle, Middle East Monitor, and a few other outlets that would try as much as possible to give you the real picture of what is happening on the ground. Israel has been bombing Gaza, and repeatedly, and that is making very little headlines in the news. But of course, when the Palestinians respond, that is an issue, and then it is perceived as if Israel is retaliating to Palestinian rockets and Palestinian provocations. I believe the rockets that were lobbed from Gaza and fell in an empty area in Israel did not cause any damages or injuries, were declared to be the responsibility of the socialist group, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. But back to you, Romana.
Yes, there are some reactions. For example, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process declared, "I am alarmed by the recent escalations in Jerusalem and around Gaza. Over the last 48 hours, there was a spike of violent clashes between Israelis and Palestinians in Jerusalem and the launching of rockets by militants in Gaza." Of course, they always have to, to appear as, as if there are two equal parties. An interesting reaction is from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who, of course, his controversial declaration. On one side, he's calling for calm on all sides. But on the other side, he also warns that Israel remains prepared for all scenarios. As you said, Netanyahu is leaving maybe one of his most difficult one of the most difficult moments in his political career. We know that he's embedded, that he's on trial for corruption, and we know that he is finding it difficult to form a government, especially after, of course, as it was clear and obvious, the extremist side of his coalition said that a government with the Arab coalition of Mansour Abbas is not possible. So now it's basically mathematically impossible for Netanyahu to reach the 61 seats that would ensure him the majority at the Israeli Knesset, at the Israeli parliament. One tweet is from Euromed Monitor. They tweeted, while facilitating settlers' racist rallies that chant death to Arabs, the Israeli forces also seek to impose new realities in East Jerusalem, including preventing Palestinian gatherings at the Damascus Gate, one of the entrances leading to the Old City and Al-Aqsa Mosque. So Euromed Monitor actually pointed out what the problem is, the racism. One last thing that I would like to say, Ramzy, is that, you know, for an Italian, seeing, you know, far-right extremists marching on a town, it evokes really bad memories, like the March on Rome, where, you know, fascists marched through the city and, you know, they took on power. I think what's happening in Israel is really, we should take a look at what's happening in Israel, because, of course, what you said is true. There is a mix between these rodents, as Rivlin called them, and the establishment, Israeli establishment, who is enabling them.
Of course.
Yeah,
and you know, you know, it's one thing that usually happens. This scenario has happened in the past and will happen again, where they create these kind of provocations, and then after the provocations are over, the Israeli government comes in and then they impose a new status quo. So they are trying to change the status quo vis-a-vis Al-Aqsa Mosque, the relationship between the Palestinians and their houses of worship in Al-Quds, and they hope and they say we are doing so because we are trying to stand between both sides. We are trying to prevent future violence, but of course it's usually the Palestinian Muslims and Christians in Al-Quds and elsewhere. It happened in Hebron as well, in Al-Khalil, that often pay the price for this. If we can just look quickly at a couple of the videos we have, there are many videos that really show what is going on. We unfortunately haven't had the chance to present you with more than this because of the limitation of time. But let's look at some of the videos showing the extremists marching into Jerusalem. So it was really quite interesting to see how when cameras are around, the Israeli police kind of appears as if they are trying to prevent the settlers from reaching Palestinian neighborhoods, but in actuality this is what's happening.
Yeah, they're very
in actuality this is what's actually taking place, and you heard the gunfire and all of that, and the other thing, what business does the Israeli army and police have in besieging Al-Aqsa Mosque, and attacking the Palestinian worshippers and the Palestinian faithful who are praying there? And don't forget, this is the month of Ramadan. Muslims have been fasting from sunrise till sunset every day for the last 12 days, and they will continue to do so for a whole month. So much of this is happening during the fast. So these men and women are already exhausted, already fatigued, and as soon as they break their fast at sunset, as soon as the illegal extremist Jewish settlers attack them at Al-Aqsa and attack their neighborhoods. So kind of a 24-hour struggle. I mean, it's a true siege that is happening there. So just to finalize our broadcast, again, thank you so much for tuning in and for following this story. And thanks to all of our readers who are keeping up with our updates on the Palestine Chronicle. And just one last thing I would like to add to that, if I know how to navigate out of this photo, is thank you, Romana, for all of your work today to produce this program at such a short notice. But I just want to say that we will be back. We will give you more updates depending on what happens in Palestine. We are in touch with our correspondents in Gaza, Wafa al-Udaini and Fawzi Mahmoud, who are feeding us with photos and news. And of course, we are following the scene in the West Bank and in Al-Quds particularly. For more information, please go to PalestineChronicle.com. If you haven't been to PalestineChronicle.com, we advise you to go now. Just bookmark the page, visit it regularly. We have a live blog for you. And did we share the live blog, Romana?
Yeah, we are going to
Let's share the live blog. You will see around the hour updates from Palestine. We wish you all who are fasting a blessed month of Ramadan Mubarak. To all of our readers, thank you, and viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in. Thank you very much for supporting the Palestine Chronicle. We will not be able to do this without you, and you are the true owners of this important medium. So thanks so much for that. We'll be back. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks again, Romana. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.